is 7:15. Thank you everybody for coming to the Norton Planning Board's meeting of Tuesday, February 2nd. Obviously, as we have been doing for the last 10 and a half months, we are doing this meeting remotely via remote participation only. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the Governor's March 15th order imposing limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Town of Norton Planning Board is being conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Norton's website, nortonma.org. For this meeting, you may participate in the following ways. Join online using the Zoom link present in the agenda posted for this meeting. And also join via the Zoom app with meeting ID 638-929-1060. There is also a phone dial-in number available on the agenda should you need it. You can also view the meeting in Norton Cable Access Channel 15 or the next day on the Norton Media Center's YouTube page. Again, no in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In addition, please feel free to email questions to the board ahead of the meeting or during the meeting to Paul DiGiuseppe, the town planner, whose email address is on the town's website. Additionally, meeting materials for the meeting are available on the Norton Planning Board's webpage. Again, in the effort we were able to do so, despite best efforts of making everything available via technological means, we will post on Town Norton's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other record of these proceedings as soon as possible thereafter. One additional aside that I will make is just a reminder to everyone on the remote meeting. Please note that the comments and chat sections of this meeting should not be used for personal comments and/or attacks. Please do not put anything in the chat which we would not say out loud in an in-person meeting, or which we would not like repeated out loud for the group and included in the minutes of the board as a matter of public record if deemed pertinent. So, I'm done being bad cop for that. And now that I've kept everybody's attention wrapped for the last 2 minutes, I'm sure, we can get started on our agenda for this evening's meeting. The agenda we do not have any planning board business and policies or bills and warrants or minutes in the folder. So that takes care of the first little bit there. Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't see anything in the folder that we needed to address in that respect.
Correct. Yeah, we usually Nicole's up on minutes, but we're a little bit behind on that. So
okay, that's fine. I'm sure just means we'll have two the next time, I guess. So, jumping right along, the next item on our agenda is the A&R endorsement number 7979 for 45 Lantern Lane. There is a plan as well as some additional documentation in the Dropbox related to this application. Paul, do we have somebody representing this applicant on the call here today? I believe we do.
We do.
Okay.
Yes. I see Roy Delano. I guess Roy, you're the agent.
Yep.
Okay.
Roy Delano from Lighthouse Land Surveying, 27 Jefferson Street in Taunton, representing Colleen Ryan of 45 Lantern Lane. Colleen is here also.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Delano, I think I'm not sure how everybody wanted to structure kind of the overview here, but if you or Colleen would like to give a quick overview of what's happening, just for the record, we'll dive right in.
Okay. Can everybody see the plan?
The members do have access. If you would like to share your screen, you should have the ability to do so. If you're not sure you have it up, Paul, I'm not sure if you want to pull it up.
I think I can do it. I can probably try it.
You do
try it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give it a try. I haven't done it before, but I'll give it a try. Let's see if that work.
You are sharing your screen.
And everybody can see the plan.
Yep.
Okay. So Colleen Ryan has owned property on Lantern Lane for, I believe, 38 years. And it's about 6 acres of land. House number 45 is down near the reservoir, along with number 39, owned by the Manassians. It's serviced by Lantern Lane, a private way, maintained by the town, off Reservoir Street. Been in existence since 1939, Lantern Lane has. I service those two houses. Colleen again has about 6 acres of land with over 500 feet of frontage on Lantern Lane. Colleen's son is at the age now where he would like to build near his mom. And so Colleen wants to take the 6 acres and provide a house lot for her son. That would be lot 2A on the plan, 60,000 square feet, over 60,000 square feet. Lot 2B would remain for Colleen's house, number 45.
Okay.
I can give you a history of Lantern Lane, or if you want to, if you have questions, I can try to answer those too.
Sure, I think that's a good summary to start with. I
Okay.
think it looks, I'll leave it open to members of the board if they have any specific questions about the A&R we have here, but I think it's fairly straightforward to me. Let's see, Oren, I saw your hand. Do you wanna...
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I'm not sure, is this attempted to qualify because of the age or because it's an accepted way? I'm just trying to understand which it is, because in the note it says that you said the legal status of the street, you weren't determined in the plan. So you gave us a letter from the superintendent of something, but I think the statute calls for either being a public way or a way which the clerk or the city or town certifies as maintained and used as a public way, or is in existence when the subdivision law became into effect, which I assume was the case, in which case, in our opinion, it has to be sufficient width, suitable grade, adequate construction, and to provide the needs for the vehicle traffic relative to proposed use, and for installation of municipal services. So I'm trying to understand which it is. The problem is, you got a letter basically from the superintendent saying it's a private way and that it's maintained. So I'm not sure how we look at that from our perspective in terms of dealing with an A&R. I don't know if Paul, if you...
Yes, we do contend it's a private way. We're asking the board to make the determination whether they feel it's sufficient for the purpose of one house lot for her son. It certainly is a private way. It's been maintained since at least that letter from Carl Jacobs, but I'm sure it's been in existence for about 80 years. And I'm sure the Manassians have owned their house since 1960. Colleen was, I believe, 1983. And Colleen, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Right.
And it has been...
1983.
Yeah, and it's been plowed and graded. There's a water line that goes down there, a town water line. There is overhead utilities down to the site. There is a sewer easement with a manhole down on the end where the driveway turns into Colleen's property, and that's maintained by the town. Our intention is that it's of sufficient width, grade. It's a road that's worked for 80 years, and it serves the purpose of accessing the two houses, number 45 and 39, and one additional house for Colleen's son, Ben.
Is that roadway?
Yeah, if I could just, hi, Colleen Ryan, Is it okay if I speak?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Hi. Good evening. Thank you very much for having us. Just to let you know that yes, the town, very nicely, the highway department has worked very well over the years to maintain the road. The road itself doesn't get a great deal of use because it's just myself and Mrs. Manassian that live down at the end. And as Roy mentioned, my son Ben is on the Zoom as well. I just would like to have him close, and I have the lay-in to do that, and I just need to have your permission to let me do that. The road actually is it's very well maintained. It is a dirt road, but it actually fares very well as a dirt road. And I've had literally no issues with the road for many, many years. As Roy mentioned, I've lived there since 1983. So we just would like to give us your consideration for us to be able to build a house for my son Ben.
So Ryan, could I ask, do you get mail delivered on Lantern Lane?
My mailbox is on Reservoir Street, but that was there the way when I moved in there. That's where it was. But the FedEx people come down the road if they need to. Then people come down if they need to. Last year I had a large truck come down to deliver kitchen equipment, which had no problem. There is a turnaround as you look down the road where the sewer easement comes in. There is a turnaround there, so it's very easy for any truck or a bigger vehicle. The ambulances are able to get down. The police, fortunately, I don't have to call the police very often, but they're able to get down as they need to as well.
Okay.
Mrs. Manassian, she actually uses a mailbox at the town post office.
Okay. Do any other members of the board have questions that they'd like to ask either Mr. Delano or the owner themselves?
The only problem I have with the plan is Roy didn't put in the walkway between the two lots where Ben is going to be coming over to borrow stuff. So
We could add that on the Mylar.
I move that we endorse the A&R as submitted.
This is Scott, I'll second. Or Scott can too.
Thank you, Joe, for the motion and Julie for the second. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Hearing none, I will go to the members for a vote. Based on the arbitrary order that they are in front of me on the Zoom screen. Joe?
Yes?
Lauren?
No.
Julie?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Delano, just so you're aware, during COVID, the planning board has adopted a single member signing for the Mylars with the registry. It's all set with the registry, but when you get the Mylar back, there will be only one name on it. That is not an error. Continue with it in that direction.
Okay. And we get the Mylar to you at what point?
You can coordinate that with Paul.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you. I
you very
appreciate it
much.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Great night. Thank you.
Okay. Paul, I don't know if you want to wrest control back here from the screen share as we continue on with the agenda. The next item on the agenda is public hearing continued, which is remand special permit 486 and 491 for 60 West Main Street, for Cumberland Farms. This has been continued from December 15th to January 19th. And as discussed at our last meeting, the discussion at this point of the public hearing will be limited to the size of the freestanding sign. I do see Attorney Reedy from the applicant here on the Zoom call. So Tom, I don't know if you wanted to lead off the discussions here based on, I know we threw a couple of different locations at you at the last meeting.
Sure, yeah. So for the record, good evening, Tom Reedy, attorney with Bacon Wilson out of Amherst, here on behalf of Cumberland Farms. Good to see everyone again. So we went back to Cumberland Farms and had a discussion with them relative to the discussion that we had at the meeting, or at the hearing. They looked at their Rentham sign and their Hart's Corner sign. And the Rentham sign has a roof on it, and it's just they don't do that sign anymore. So what they did was we're proposing something similar to the Taunton sign. And so it's 12 feet in height. And I can, Paul, I don't know if you have it up. If not, I can probably figure out how to do this.
If you have it, Tom, it's easy to, you got it.
Perfect. Okay. So this is the Hart's Corner sign. So 12 feet high, and then 54 square feet is what you've got here. I don't know if I can change this. Let me see if I can share my other screen. I'll never switch like that. Ta-da. So then this is the one that we'd be proposing for this site in Norton. It's effectively the same sign, it just has the stone veneer, which is something that the Hart's Corner sign doesn't have. And so that's, if you'll recall, that follows kind of the rest of the architecture by the gas pumps, by the entrance to the store, etc. So, we have reduced, what we were approved for was bigger than what we've got here. And hearing Joe's comments, we thought that this sign would be the most appropriate. And also it has the, as you'll recall, I think the building commissioner out of abundance of caution determined that these right here, the gas prices are electronic message centers. This doesn't have, as you probably have seen in other Cumberland Farms, where they have a screen that'll show the price of milk or the price of a sandwich, coffee, etc. This doesn't have that. What you see here is what you get. So it's the special permit for the electronic message center, those being the gas prices.
Thank you, Tom. And just to restate for the record, this is also covered by the, you had previously gotten a variance on the sign as well through the zoning. Joe, I know this has kind of been one of your, I'll call it a pet pieces of the project, based on what you have in front of you from the applicant. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's better than originally proposed. I'm a little curious, Tom, the Rentham site having a roof over it. That must be the old center Cumberland Farms, because the other Cumberland Farms with the gas station on Route 1A is literally brand new. So, and it's smaller than this. I didn't measure it. I did measure this, and I know that this is 12 feet.
Yeah, I would agree. So I had, like I said last time, I had done that Rentham one. It is newer. I believe that is the site right next to the CVS, which was an interesting development to begin with. That also doesn't have electronic message boards. I think they have the old signs that you actually go out and remove. You'll recall probably with those tall signs, they bring the stick out and change it every time they bought a new shipment of gasoline. But that's what that sign has. So where you see here, we have these two. They only, on Rentham, I think, have one. And so I think effectively it has shrunk it down because it's not electronic. That's my guess. But it does have that roof over it. And I think a lot of that was done because, like I said, uniquely, the CVS and the Cumberland Farms were presented simultaneously because it was a different development. It's one of the, like I said, it's unique to anything else I've seen Cumberland Farms do. So I think that's how that one existed, which is a little bit, yes, it exists, but it's a little bit of an anomaly as far as Cumberland Farms.
Now, I think this is, again, a little more in keeping with what I think we want to establish in terms of a look for the center of town. 12 feet isn't for me problematic.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Do any other members have comments regarding this sign and the design, etc.?
Tim, I have one, if you don't mind.
Please, Julie.
So, Tom, I just want to make sure the sighting on the revised height is still good for sight distance lines out of both, obviously the Cumberland Farms and then also the matching school driveways, obviously adjacent to the property. I'm assuming the placement is, well placed. I mean, obviously the sign from the looks of it is very, it doesn't have any holes to see through, you know what I mean? It's very solid in nature, so just want to make sure that the sight lines are going to work well, both with your driveway and then obviously the driveway that's utilized by the Yale School.
Yeah, great question, Julie. So the sighting of the sign hasn't changed from when we had originally proposed it, which I think we had discussed this at those hearings over a year ago, or maybe a year ago. And I think there was adequate sight lines with that sign where it existed. And it was, I think 14 feet is what we had proposed. And so this has been dropped down. I don't think, I think the sign was bigger then. So I don't think that it's like we scrunched it down to reduce the area underneath it. I think we just made everything a little bit smaller. Like if you look at it from the diagonal corners, it made it a little bit smaller instead of just crunching. So I guess that would be my response there.
So Julie, your concern was that we were not relying on a quote unquote hole underneath the sign for any visibility.
Yeah, or any separation, let's say, between where the variable messaging sign center is and the actual Cumberland Farms signage. Just making sure that I think we've had a lot of these conversations about traffic and sight lines, and we don't want anybody to have to feel like they need to scooch out too far into 123 to be able to see around the sign, or whatever the case may be. So just thinking that through and making sure that if Tom's saying it's right, it's kind of just like kind of shrunken in, then that could potentially be a good thing from a sight line standpoint. Just making sure that the dimensional elements, kind of in the vertical elements here are right, so that nobody's being obscured from the sign. I mean, I like the new sign. I think it looks very good. I'm all for it. Just want to make sure from a safety standpoint, nobody's going to be inching their car out too far in order to, potentially have something happen. So that's all.
Yeah, and I think, to that end, I would find it pretty unique, again, to have Cumberland rely on folks looking between the bottom of a sign and the top of like a landscape island, because they're going to look to landscape. I mean, so what I've done here is I've pulled up the site plan so that you can see where it is, how it's set back, where the stop line is in relation to where it's set back.
Yep, that looks good.
How, that road curves the way it does. So that's why, for all those reasons, we think it's going to work just fine.
Yeah, it looks like there's a dimension in there too, Tom. So that's good, just to make sure that it's set back far enough.
Yeah, 10 feet is, I think, what we're talking about right there.
Okay.
So Paul, this is Scott. Just for the record, I have no objection against the modified design, but to just track back to Joe's comment, I pasted in the comments there a street view of the Rentham sign, in case anyone was interested, to Joe's point earlier.
Thank you, Scott. This question is for Tom and or Paul. Do we have, is there an updated site plan with the revised height and the revised landscaping in one piece? Or is that something that we would need to condition as part of any approval to the site plan?
That's the primary reason there's a site plan modification. So Tom's group did provide updated the site plan set for landscaping and for the sign. So that's been referenced in the site plan modification.
With a 12-foot height listed on the site plan?
I did add it to the language of the site plan modification.
Thank you, Paul.
And let me get back on that, Chair. Just one aspect of that too.
I think that's a good point, because I'm looking at the site plan and it says proposed 14-foot 7-inch monument sign with planter, and so obviously we're talking about a 12-foot sign. So I think, you know, if there's a condition that we resubmit the site plan showing that it's a 12-foot sign, then I don't think that's an issue at all for us.
Yeah, and we also want to show the additional landscaping that you put on the boundary line with the school property as well.
Yeah, and that's on. So what I have on the screen now is CFG 8.0, and so this includes the additional tree planting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's there, but I'm looking at it right now, that 4.0, it says proposed 14-foot 7-inch monument sign. So that could be gussied up to reflect the 12-foot that we just talked about. And then if you approve that CFG 13.0 that I had up on the screen, this site plan references that, so I think you kind of come full circle to make sure everything's consistent.
Yeah, 13.0 it shows it as 12 feet. And this is one of the plans in the plan set, so, but I guess if we modify that of the other document, if you direct them to modify the other plan page, plan sheet to revise that to 12 feet.
Okay. Are there any other comments from members of the board relating to the sign itself? Okay, hearing none, we do still have the public hearing for this application open, and then we would have a special, and then we would need a decision on the electronic message center aspect of the permit. Is that correct, Paul, in terms of the
Yes.
two aspects that we would need to address at this point?
Right, the site plan modification and the special permit for the electronic message center.
Okay, so there are two decisions, as well as the closing of as well as the open public hearing as items to address.
Close the public hearing.
Can I just, one thing on the public hearing, not to complicate things. So I know that we have proposed conditions, you know, that the board is going to end up discussing. Understanding that this is in litigation, to me, if there are conditions that the applicant would say, well, hold on a second, I don't want to either A, end up back here to discuss those conditions at that time, or B, bring the litigation forward because we missed the opportunity to discuss those conditions now. I guess I would just suggest, if possible, to discuss those conditions in the public hearing so that you might be able to hear some feedback from the applicant, and then you can make your decisions, obviously. But there are a couple of the conditions, one from the original, and then the balance, not created by
the board
Paul,
that you received through Paul.
but new. Yeah. Not the ones all the ones that Paul provided were that I think he provided, that we had talked about the last time, with the crossing guard, the police detail, the upgrade to the pedestrian equipment, and to the restrictions on the tanker truck are fine. But there were some other new suggested conditions that I think we would have issue with all of those. And then while I'm on this, let me complete my thought. So then there's prior to construction condition 8, which requires a surety through an escrow account, an amount of $50,000 to be increasing in amount as the tanks and systems servicing those tanks and systems near the ends of their useful life. So that's something that Cumberland Farms has a pretty big issue with. Their contention is that they work with the state, and the state is the overseeing body when it comes to underground storage tanks, etc. And so that would be out of the conditions that were imposed previously, that's the only one that they have an issue with. So I thought it'd be important to bring it up for discussion.
So if the board wants to discuss it, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Let me see here. So we have the public hearing remaining open. We have the electronic message center, and then we have the site plan modification approval. The conditions that I think the applicant is referencing, Paul, I believe those came from members of the board through you.
And then the surety for the decommissioning was from the approved site plan, or the previous decision made.
That was from the previous decision that...
Right. It's not something we've suggested with these two decisions.
Understood. Okay. In terms of moving forward here, Paul, do you want to maybe share your screen so we're not talking about these points in the abstract? I know they've been emailed out to the board, but just to run through them. We don't need to approve the full decision at this point, since there may be some, especially in terms of organizing the numbering and things like that, but in terms of understanding what we put into it, and then we can approve the final version at our next meeting, perhaps, if that makes sense.
So do you want me to start with the draft that I created for the special permit?
I believe that is the one that had the most significant changes. Correct.
Can I ask Tom, are there any other ones that are kind of deal breakers on your end?
From the original, no. That was, so from that original permit, no, that was it. I think we would have issue with some of the findings made, and I can go through and kind of enumerate those, and then some of the conditions. And
okay.
Especially, I think they're from the...
I think that, Tom, how I would like to do this is to run through this as a board. And if we have comments that we want to throw back to you, we certainly will. And I don't think we'll be shy about it.
No problem.
But we can deal with this as part of our internal process, and rather than kind of make you have to feel like you need to respond on a pogo stick to everything that comes across the screen. So Paul, I don't know if you want to share the draft decision. I know I had made a couple of comments to you, I think, earlier today, and I believe at least one other member of the board had passed a couple of things along to you as items to discuss incorporating into the decision. So I'll wait for you to pull that up on screen, because I know we have everything in our Dropbox, but we also...
So this is the one that I sent out to you all. Jared, would you rather have one of the other versions?
Sure. I think, and this is the one without any tracked changes, correct?
Correct.
Sure. Why don't I think the one that, the final one that I sent to you had both my comments as well as the other comments all incorporated into one. So why don't we pull that up in terms of what we're looking at, rather than trying to bounce back and forth between different documents, yeah. So in terms of the red lines that are here, I see that we're...
Tim, could that be any bigger?
I can try to zoom in.
because there are track changes and red lines, it always shrinks the text because you have that sidebar on the right side of the screen. Let's see if we can do that a little bit more anyway. Page width.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it'll do anything, but we'll try. It's a little bit better. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that the red lines on 2 and 3 I think are fairly straightforward because we are referencing the exhibits. And that was and we did discuss that. When we get down to the bottom, I think, Oren, I think you had incorporated a couple of comments about the tanks as well as the traffic. So I think, Oren, I think what you had added is in red, and then what I had tried to maybe try and keep the spirit of what you had put in there in a slightly different format was in blue. So you were discussing what we talked about with the environmental engineer in terms of emissions from the tanks and studies and things like that. In terms of this being the findings of fact, I'm not sure if I'm sure this wasn't what you intended, Oren, but reading it kind of outside of the context of what we've discussed, I think I personally felt like what was in here kind of felt a little bit kind of gotcha-y in terms of how it was phrased. So I tried to, I understand that nobody's, that what I put in blue is kind of new to everybody here, but just in terms of trying to summarize it in more of a, in a way that didn't feel, I guess, as, it felt a little personal to me in the first take, so I wanted to try and bring it to more of a summarized version. Oren, do you feel like I've captured what you intended there?
I was just taking the notes that were generated by the notes that were handed out. I just put those right from that information. And you have, with regard, if I can maybe read it out loud because I'm having trouble reading.
I could, with regard to ventilation and environmental safety, the applicant represented some of the safety features inherent in the system proposed and approved. The applicant's representative acknowledged that gasoline vapors are emitted into the air to maintain the air pressure levels in the tank. While data on the quantity of emissions was not provided, was stated that occurrences should be infrequent and are generally considered less significant than vapors emitted by parked vehicles in similar conditions.
One of the concerns I have, Tim, is with agreeing to a remand. My understanding that basically, given some concerns with not having enough information to be able to substantiate our positions, that's what we were going to be looking to do to confirm that. I don't. I guess for the safety features, I guess I'm okay with that. I mean, the reality, the problem I have is there's information we don't know, and they haven't provided it. I know the question that will come up in one of the conditions is whether or not we want to pursue and make sure we get the information that was started to be requested, just to make sure they comply with some standards. This language or some other language saying they didn't provide that information or they didn't know it would give us reason to do that. If we're not inclined to put those conditions in, then some of this language can be watered down. But to substantiate one of those conditions, I think making it clear that information, that's a concern, the information was not available and they did not know the answer to the questions, and no effort was made to find out those answers. Again, could warrant a condition if the board was inclined to do it. If the court is not inclined to do it, your language is fine. If it is, then some language outlining why we're taking that position would be appropriate.
Okay. Do you feel I know there's another set of these findings immediately on after this. Do you feel it's more appropriate from your perspective, Oren, given that you're seeing kind of the two sections as connected, to start at the other end in terms of what we look at?
I think perhaps. I mean, that's
Okay.
I think I want the facts to substantiate the decision, and if the decision is without those conditions, then certainly the facts aren't necessarily relevant, and I concur with that.
Okay. Paul, why don't we scroll down later in this document then to where some of the additional conditions, suggested conditions were added. Keep going. Further, way back in the, there were keep going. Okay, so maybe undo the cross out here, but I think that, Oren, if I'm correct, all of these were in the draft decision from March, and we decided not to include them in the initial decision, correct?
I believe so, but I just wanted to be clear that those were in, and just so the board is aware, the initial draft that came out, I think, was missing because we were referring to the original decision. The original decision had no conditions at all. This was a denial. So what this draft does is intend to put back conditions, and basically I used both the conditions that were in the 319-20 draft decision and the special permit decision. I try to match them up, and so yes, these were in that preliminary draft, and I believe those were eliminated, and that's why I've eliminated. I just listed them here just so you're aware of them. I was not saying that we should have them or not, but that's why I listed them.
Okay. Yeah, because I think the one that jumped out to me, especially the benzene one, it seems to me like that was something that we covered, I think, a little bit in the last hearing, that
Yep.
gasoline vapor does contain benzene. So if you're trying to say build a gas station with no benzene emissions, it's kind of like saying make fried chicken, but you can only use pork.
I was not presenting those other than to give for information purposes, because we had them in an initial draft, and I don't know. I believe you're right. That's why they came out, but I just listed them that way.
Okay. So I think from my perspective, I'm not sure if I think that we should not be including. I don't think we need to add but I don't want. I'm gonna speak as myself as a member of the board, not as the chair. But I think the conditions 8 through 10 potentially added here. I'm not sure I feel they're appropriate for this decision, especially because we didn't include them in the last one. Does anybody else have any additional thoughts regarding these conditions?
I just one other thought, and I'm trying to remember. I thought there was something in either the decisions or the discussions about arranging for some timing with the light at 123. I know that came up. I'm not sure why that came out. I'm not sure if that's the right language or whether it's somewhere else listed in the decision. But I thought there was something that was discussed about coordinating timing with that light. Maybe I'm forgetting something. I don't know. You recall any of that? Does anyone else on the board remember that?
I believe it was discussed in abstract that if there were issues with the lights relating to the changes in conditions, then that would be something that we could try to work with MassDOT on in some way. But I don't think it was a burden we were putting to the applicant. I think it was something that we're looking at this whole area from the town perspective. So I think that the light timing in that whole intersection is something that we're going to be looking at a lot in the next 5-10 years. Any other members of the board have anything specifically to these conditions, which are numbered 8 through 10 in this document? Or should we move on down a little bit further on this page toward numbers what am I talking about here? 15-ish.
15 to 16.
Yeah. Yeah, these ones, this one, the first one, Oren, I read it and it sounded very open-ended to me. Because I know we've talked about a police detail and things like that on a limited basis. This one seemed to read to me as anytime, if the chief of police thinks there needs to be a police detail, period, the applicant would need to provide one forever. Was that the intention in that condition?
No, and I think we've addressed it in other situations. And also, I know they're looking at it with the marijuana retail stores. My concern is basically, we've got a bad situation. We know it's being backed up to a certain point. My guess will be this will make the situation worse. There's going to be need for a detail at some point for some periods of time. And basically, is the town going to pay for it? Are we going to pay for it? But they're saying they're not going to have much impact, but right now we know they're going to be backed up to at least their property 25% of the time for the hour and a half that's critical. And I'm just saying, if we're going with their analysis and they don't have much of an impact, that's fine. But if maybe we're on a consistent basis, I don't have a problem with adding a standard. But if basically, if in fact the numbers are a lot higher than we're projecting, and basically it's going to interfere with the Yellen School and the high school in terms of backing up that kind of time, and we're going to need a police officer, I think the burden should fall on them. Whether the language as to when that has to happen and whether it's reasonable and the timing, I'm open to. But I think that's a situation that I'm concerned with, and I think the superintendent was concerned with. And I guess whose burden would that be? We're looking at putting in something, and everybody's saying they want to get revenue for the town. But I suspect if that is in fact a problem, that cost is going to far exceed any revenue we get from the operation of this facility.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how given that concern, I'm not sure how we would word that, because as it's written, it is very open-ended, and from the applicant's perspective, that's a fairly significant potential liability in terms of the project itself. I realize that from that perspective, not our problem, but I'm not sure if that. I'm not sure if any of the members of the board have feelings about how we should approach that language. Since I know we've already had some discussions about details initially around school starting up and things like that, but I'm going to stop rambling and let other members of the board speak here, since I'm sure you all love hearing my voice all the time. And I'm hearing crickets. Okay. I think we have, or I think my perspective would be that we have already talked about the potential for a detail and crossing guard assistance in that way. I mean, we kind of keep circling around the same drain issue here in terms of understanding the level of impact this is going to have on the traffic, and in terms of what the traffic study and the peer review came to. Given that the conditions already exist where things are backed up that way, it's kind of, personally, I don't feel like we can make them pay to solve the problem that already exists,
Well, Tim, can I propose maybe another topic for conversation that might ease a little bit of what Oren's talking about, although I agree that the applicant has put a specific timeline on the crossing guard and the police detail, which I think, was in Paul's draft pretty clearly stated. But I kind of wanted to, in the spirit of keeping the public hearing open and maybe direct this a little bit towards Tom, but I know for some of these hours of operation and the truck tanker delivery, some of it ends at 8 o'clock. Would there be any willingness to move that to 8:30 to get through the school? The Yale school starts at 8:20, so we'd clear that by 10 minutes, and that might ease maybe some concerns over traffic and potential deliveries or large-scale trucks that are accessing the site. I don't know if that moves the needle at all, but I thought at least in this forum it'd be worth bringing up for discussion.
Yeah, Julie, if I could, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Julie, I think that's fine. I think if you think it's more effective to extend it to 8:30, then I think that makes a lot of sense. So we can certainly change that condition.
So I think, the high school starts a lot earlier, but I just double checked on the Yale's hours, and that clears at least till 8:20. It looks like is their kind of official start time. So if we shifted some of these truck deliveries, maybe even construction vehicles, I don't know, however we want to extend it, but I think if we at least try to clear that morning rush hour, there's at least a small movement of the needle there.
You're late getting your kid to school, then it's your own problem.
Well, I mean, to be honest, with the development that's going on Plain Street, by the LGN, I have sat and seen trucks trying to access that site while school traffic has been happening, and I think they might be more frustrated than the parents.
Understood, Julie. So that, Paul, if you want to make a note on that, that is 2 conditions up in what is currently numbered 13, but will probably change when we renumber everything. Yeah, right there. And I'm not sure if there are additional points where we talk about operating hours of deliveries earlier in the decision. So I'll refrain from piping in at that point. Let's see, I don't think, were there any other additional, okay. So Oren, given that, let's see, we did have one additional note, I believe, in the post-occupancy conditions, which was in number 4, about the volume of the messaging on the pumps and things like that. Yeah, right there, Paul. Yeah, I do remember talking about that. Joe, I remember you specifically wanting to make sure that the staff on premise had the ability to change the volume, because I know you had been at facilities where they said they'd love to, but they can't control it. It's controlled from somewhere in the ether.
That language is actually in the in the site plan conditions. It wasn't in the March 19th, 20 decision, but it was in our actual decision that added language. So that is part of our current decision. That's not added. I just had to show it as different, that's all. So that language is in our current site plan decision currently.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification there, Oren. Okay. Paul, were there any other conditions that we had that I don't think I had made any additional ones, but that would bring us back up to that last finding of fact in regarding of traffic. And I guess, Oren, I'll steal your wording. I also watered this one down a little bit in terms of, I'm not sure if we can put in the measurement because it wasn't done by a professional firm. The measurement that you had done physically on 140, it does not done to an engineering standard, so it feels a little bit awkward to throw in there.
Joe can measure a monument sign, but I can't measure the number of cars. I mean, we've testified as to, we saw traffic, you've seen traffic backed up. You testified as to what the situation is on the ground, the size of the streets. We've got measurements from when we did the Condyne. Paul and Joe said the streets was such and such a square size. So how is that different?
Well, if I could, one of the problems I had with your, again, I trust that you can count cars turning in, but this information doesn't tell me if a car was northbound when it turned in, that it then remained northbound, thus it doesn't constitute a new trip. That's what a professional engineer, a traffic engineer, would tell us.
No, but what I used is the same percentage. The trip generation gives you a total, and it then has a percentage of what the new trips are. I applied that same percentage to dealing with those cars. So it was the total, really, if you look at, and both, it's total to total. Forget about trips and new trips or old trips. It's still total to total, and basically, there's a lot more. But all I've been trying to do, Joe, all in this process is, I understand there are standards, and the standards, as I think I've shown, or it's been shown, have been established over a course of a long period of time. In some cases, these are going back into 20 years ago. But that's the standard, and that's what's being used by everybody. And from the beginning, I've been trying to get this applicant to say, and you're in this business, you can't tell me they don't know exactly how much business they do in those hours and how busy their traffic is compared to the rest of the day. I've asked for that information. And so I got kind of frustrated and said, well, let me just try and do some counting. I'm not saying it's the best counting and it's completely accurate, but it blew a hole for me in terms of the total numbers. And then we just take a look at, they were saying, okay, and again, as when I sent it out to everybody, I'm not an expert, and I looked at that table looked like it should have been binding. Okay, the expert said you shouldn't. They could have told me that. I mean, they had that information for a while. Instead of coming back to me and saying I did it wrong or providing me with the information, they didn't. Okay, she said it's either or. But just for your information, using either or, they used the lesser of the two. They said you could either use square footage, in which case it's 178. That's total trips. That's not new trips. When you use the fuel positions, it comes out to 249. So I just want to just be aware of the fact that they're the applicant. They're coming to show the best case. If they have the option of showing the lesser or the greater one, which are they going to show you? So they showed you the lesser one, and I just was very suspicious of that, and I just tried to do a count. Is my count completely accurate? Did I get everything right? I don't know. But what it showed to me is a very good indication that their experience is going to be a lot more than what's been projected. And that concerns me. Listen, I don't live there. I don't have kids in school. But it's obviously a real problem for the town, and that's why I was looking to address it. And again, I put this in if we're going to look for them to put some limitations on when, and I'm open to when it is, but if it appears that we're going to need a patrol, a police detail, because of basically this traffic going in and out. And understand this, one other thing. You had pass-through traffic. That's fine, that's traffic going in the same direction. They themselves say there's 33 cars that would be going in the other direction. That means there's 33 cars during that period of time that's going to be crossing a lane. And I'm envisioning a really bad situation getting very bad. And I don't mind putting a different standard in it, but if in fact we have to put a police detail because of, maybe come up with some language, their activity. And their activity, as you know, is unique in terms of, it's focused on the worst time for us in terms of the school activity. Not any other retail is as focused as they are. And because of that, we should be able to put some constraints on them. We're here in a remand. Everything they're offering now, they offered as a settlement. We could have settled this case before. We said, no, we want to come back and have a remand because we want to look at some more facts. Right now, we're eliminating all the facts. There weren't many that came up. There were a lot of questions I asked. Nobody answered any of them. And so we're limited to what we have. And I'm just concerned, and I'd like to see some kind of standard say, if we have a police patrol that's needed because of their operations, and I don't know how to word it, then they should pick up that cost.
Okay. Yeah, I think speaking for myself, I think, Steve, I'll let you speak in just a second. I think it'll be hard to really draw a causality line there, especially at that intersection when it comes to traffic. And I definitely understand your frustration in terms of feeling as if your questions aren't being answered, and I will take the onus for that in terms of trying to make sure that at the very minimum, questions like that we are putting across, that if the applicant simply wishes to say, I don't have that information, or I'm not prepared to provide that information, meaning that the board will have to make a decision without an answer, then I will try to be making an effort to at least get that to you more effectively, rather than feeling like you're screaming at a wall. Steve, did you want to say something further?
Yeah, no, I was just going to circle back to what originally started this, and I agree with you that it's not needed in this document. It's been discussed ad nauseum in several different meetings. It's on the record, Warren's dissent on this part, but yeah, I agree with you. This does not need to be in there.
Joe, it looked like you were about to say something as well. Do you want to?
I don't want to prolong the discussion. I too agree that I don't believe this should be here. I've got a couple of concerns in terms of both process and specific to this comment. Is an engineer did a traffic analysis. That analysis was reviewed by our peer reviewer, and there was no feeling in here that those types of comments never came across from either their engineer or our peer reviewer. And Warren referenced that I was in the business. I spent a fair amount of retail, and this is the seat of the pants observation. Yes, Cumberland Farms can tell you by the hour what their customer count is, both for gas and for indoor retail. What they can't tell you is where the traffic comes from and where it goes once it leaves. They, like everyone else, would rely on modeling unless they go out there and do an actual count. And this is where the seat of the pants comes in. I'd be willing to bet, Orrin or anyone else, a dinner of his choosing, once restaurants open up, that CVS generates close to, if not the same amount of traffic. But what I've maintained and felt all along, that the traffic that Cumberland Farms is going to feed off of is different than the traffic that someone like CVS generates. CVS is a destination in large part, and no one drives down West Main Street and says, oh, there's CVS, let me go have a prescription filled in. It's generally they go there with a purpose. Whereas something like a Cumberland Farms or most other gas stations, you're driving by, I'm going to need gas. Very few of us, drive across town to go get gas. We wait till we're going by one on a trip to somewhere else. And that's been my feeling all along, that as bad as the traffic is, it already exists, and this is just going to feed off of it. And again, at times I think the traffic will actually be improved by people, rather than sit in the eastbound traffic at 3 o'clock backed up from that light. They pull in and get gas while they're waiting. Just, again, a very seat of the pants observation.
Thank you, Joe. I believe that covers the track changes that we had passed along in the draft decision, Paul, you had circulated. That we've covered those. Tom, I will throw it back to you, since you were the one who wanted to kind of keep the public hearing open for a bit. Is there anything further that we have not discussed in the conditions that you would like to address before we move forward in terms of either finalizing decisions or closing the public hearing?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Chair. So I think there is one more, condition number 8. What I will say about the exercise you just went through, I think you hit everyone that we had an issue with, and I think with the blue line, so-called, we're fine with what you have in there for findings and conditions for decision. So it's just this number 8, and from what
just to confirm, there's a couple of number 8s, so I want to make sure we're looking at the same thing. That is the number 8 on page number 4, I believe, correct, Paul, and that is the escrow for surety.
Yeah, and so, yes, that's the correct one. What Cumberland Farms tells me is that the state monitors the process. And so I wonder if, if we struck this, that would be my preferred, but understanding that you may not want to strike that and to keep this in somehow, if you couch it as, if the state fails to monitor, then the applicant and the town may agree to a form of surety. So something like that, just to require, first, to put the burden where it belongs, which is the relationship between Cumberland Farms and the state. And then if that fails, to allow a mechanism to have the applicant and the town talk about, because, this $50,000, to be increased in an amount, as it when we talked about open-ended before, this seems a little bit open-ended, and I don't know, this is a little bit different than like a decommissioning surety, like in a solar array project, where you have, a decommissioning bond with known costs based on inflation and salvage value and all of that, or some sort of performance guarantee in a subdivision context, both which obviously the planning board is well within their purview to require. This seems just a little something different. And so our first suggestion would be just to strike it, but in an effort to get a compromise, maybe place the burden between Cumberland Farms and the state, and then failing that, have a mechanism to have the applicant and the town look to negotiate something.
Okay. I think that from an initial perspective, I think that makes sense. Paul, I think maybe that's something that we could potentially finalizing the wording in combination with town council in terms of ensuring that made sense. Is that, I'm not sure if other members of the board have additional thoughts, but that would seem to make sense to me, Paul.
Can I suggest something to you? Basically, this is in the site plan decision, which was, I don't believe, was appealed. So that's part of it. That is now part of the site plan decision. We're merely modifying it to accommodate the sign. This is merely a copy of what's in that decision. So that's already part of the decision. And that decision, I don't believe, was appealed. Just for your information.
I think it was appealed.
Site plan was appealed too?
I think what we did was appealed both special. Our MO is typically to appeal site plan and special permit if both come out. I'll check though.
Okay, because I think
yeah, I think you're right on it. It was approved, so.
But even so, sometimes a little bit behind the curtain. Even if things are approved, but they have burdensome conditions, we will appeal them. But let me get a confirmation before I talk too much.
Okay. That's something that obviously Amy could confirm as well as town council, since she would be the one on the receiving end of any appeals. So, or in abstract, do you think that type of a language would make sense to your perspective from a surety? Because I'm not sure if this originated from you or originated from somewhere else, but
no, I think
it seems like your fingerprints.
It might have, but it came off probably a solar decommissioning language. And I just want to add one other thing. Given the new announcement by General Motors that they're eliminating gas cars and limitations for the next 15 years, to tell you the truth, once that happens and they convert and they no longer need 2 tanks, I'd almost like to see them take out the tanks when they're not needed and not wait until they're no longer have a useful life. That's part of, And then the other thing is this $50,000 not only goes to removal, but it goes to testing. And we've gone through that. We've dealt with the state now in terms of what they've done with one of the sites, and how much we had to pay on top of what the state.
Reed and Barton, yeah.
So I don't know if this is unusual. The fact it's already been approved, my own sense is I would vote for it.
It might actually be an extra tank to power the generators to power the electric cars.
Let's not talk about the circular nature of energy generation here. I think that's a subject that we are not qualified to go into in any detail.
Sure.
But I think that we can work with Amy to work on the specific wording of. I mean, if the state is in charge of the monitoring and the removal and all that stuff, I'm fine not having to deal with it from a town's perspective, but having that fallback in there makes sense to me in terms of if the state is not fulfilling their obligations in terms of working with the operator, then there is a mechanism with which to do so within this decision.
Tim, if I could, this is Joe. There is a state requirement, I don't know if it goes through the state fire marshal's office, but within X number of days, and I think it was 60 days, but I could be wrong, Tom may know, that within a certain period of time after the cessation of pumping of gas, a tank must come out. I don't know how they enforce that, but that's already on the books. I find this both redundant and unnecessary.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Yeah, Paul, if you can confirm potential wording with Amy, as well as just making sure that this specific aspect of the decision is something that does fall under this appeal remand process, and cross that T/dot the I to address that. Are there any other comments that anyone had? I know there were additional notes in terms of the site plan modification, the site plan, and one of the other documents as well. But I think those are fairly straightforward, and trying to think of the word, but I cannot think of the word right now. Superficial doesn't seem like the right word either, but I can't think of a better one, so I'll say superficial. Yeah, I know there were 2 additional documents that you had circulated, Paul. Is this one of the other ones?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think we had, there was just a couple of quick changes up at the top there.
Right.
Which we already also copied through in the other findings of fact.
Did we get the crosswalks in one of these? I'm sorry, I kind of lost some version control on where everything landed. I think
striping
Tom,
across the curb cuts.
Yeah, of curb cuts that Tom agreed to for their entry and exit points. Did we get that? Oh, there it is. Okay, great. All right, great. I'm just making sure we got everything, as we've kind of been back and forth on a few different versions of the document. Or documents, I should say.
Understood, and I appreciate it, Julie, because I think all of us in everything are dealing with version control in our lives, so definitely helpful there. And Paul, there was one other document that I know had been circulated. I think that was just a summary pulled out of the special permit decision, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we've
There was one other thing in the special permit. There's also attached to that was the special permit for the electronic signboard. And the question had, do we add any conditions to that relative to either the size or the fact that they will limit the electric board to just their pricing and nothing else? Do we need that as a condition? Any electric board?
Let me see. I don't think it necessarily references this. The height will be on the site plan attached to the project. I mean, in terms of the only messaging being the pricing, I mean, I think that is something that we can look at. I mean, our bylaws around electronic message center are I feel like they're fairly strict in terms of what they allow and what they don't allow. Any of the things that they don't allow, I seem to see happening around town, which is a topic for a whole different day, but I mean, I don't feel the need to put that in the decision, but I'm only one person.
And could I ask, and I want to thank Julie for confessing to the same sin I have. I'm having difficulty looking at 3 different devices and different versions of final product. But why don't I see hours of operation?
Sure, 20 hours of operation, I believe, are 24/7.
Well, that's what I thought, but I don't see it. So unless that's in a version.
I did see it someplace, Joe. It is in one of them.
Definitely a mobile.
Yeah. Okay.
It's number 4 in prior to final occupancy. No, it's post occupancy number 4.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. I just closed that document. I was trying to open it back up on me. But, okay. So I think we have a little bit of homework in terms of the wording of a couple of different points. Other than that, are there any additional actions that people would like to take in regards to the open items we have with regard to this application? As a reminder, we still have the public hearing being open. We have the electronic message center decision, and then we have the site plan modification decision. And I'll just say one final reminder to please refrain from making personal comments in the chat. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to go quiet and wait for somebody else to propose action on one of the items I just listed.
Well, I guess I'll go back to closing the public hearing. I move to close the public hearing.
I second that.
Thank you, Steve, for the motion and Julie for the second. Is there any further discussion from members of the board? Hearing none, I will go to a vote of the members. They've always moved around in here, so keep on your toes here. Joe?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Oren?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And Kevin?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. The public hearing for the Cumberland Farms project is now closed. And do we feel we want to take any additional actions at this time? Or given what we've talked about, do we want to circulate final versions before we move forward on anything?
No, I'll motion to approve the special permit for the sign.
Thank you, Steve, for the motion.
This is Joe, I'll second.
Thank you, Joe, for the second. Is there any further discussion regarding the motion to approve the special permit for the sign electronic message center? Hearing none, I will go to the vote. Joe? Julie?
Yes.
Oren?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Okay, so the special permit for electronic message center has been approved. And the only remaining outstanding decision is the site plan approval, which we are going to get. We'll be looking for an updated site plan with all of the landscaping and striping of the curb cuts and the sign height. but if we wanted to make a conditional motion, we could certainly do that. Otherwise, we could move to table that to our next meeting.
You may want to wait if town council's looking at the language in the special permit condition that we talked about relative to the bond. And if that does exist in the site plan and you're going to change it in one, you may end up changing it in the other. So, just a thought.
So I would look for a motion from members of the board, either to table or to look to conditionally approve.
Unless anyone objects, I'll motion to table it to the next meeting.
Thank you, Steve, for the motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Julie, for the second. Is there any further discussion from members of the board? Hearing none, motion is to table the site plan approval modification. Joe, you're up first.
Yes.
Julie,
Yes.
Oren,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. So table that decision to our next meeting, which is February 23rd. Let me pull up. So that concludes our discussion on this item on our agenda. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Attorney Reedy.
Thank you.
Moving on our agenda this evening, we have two more items on the agenda, but both of them are seeking continuances to our next meeting. The first is 227 East Main Street with a special permit site plan for Blue Star Business Park. So I'd be looking for a motion to continue that to February 23rd.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Joe, for the motion and Oren for the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will move to the vote. Joe? Julie?
Yes.
Oren?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Finally, I'm sure you've all been waiting. We're also looking for a continuance for 0 Rear Eddy Street, which has been continued. I can't count the number of times, but they're looking to continue also to the February 23rd meeting.
So moved. So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Steve, for the motion and Julie for the second. Is there any further discussion on the motion to continue 0 Rear Eddy Street to February 23rd? Hearing none. Joe? Joe, you're not... There we go. Gotcha. Julie?
Yes.
Oren?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. That is the last item on our agenda for this evening. Does anybody have anything else they would like to speak to the rest of the members about?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Julie, for the motion, Steve for the second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing only smiles and no discussion. Joe?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Oren?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Meeting at Norton Planning Board of February 2nd is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
The recording
Happy
has
Groundhog
stopped.
Day.